Every morning at exactly 7:30, Michael walked through Central Park on his way to school. And every morning, he saw the same thing, an empty green bench under an old maple tree. Well, not completely empty. There was always an old man sitting there, feeding pigeons and smiling at passers-by. The old man wore the same blue cap every day and carried a small paper bag full of breadcrumbs. Michael had never spoken to him, but somehow his presence had become a comforting part of his daily routine. One rainy Monday morning, Michael noticed something different. The bench was truly empty. No old man, no paper bag, no pigeons. Michael felt strangely worried. He had never missed a day in 2 years. The next day was the same, an empty bench. And the next and the next. A week passed and the old man didn't return. The pigeons seemed to be waiting too, gathering around the bench each morning as if hoping for their friend to appear. On Friday, Michael made a decision. Instead of walking past, he sat down on the bench. From his backpack, he took out some bread from his breakfast sandwich and broke it into small pieces. The pigeons approached cautiously. As he fed the birds, an elderly woman stopped nearby. "Oh," she said softly, "you're sitting in Arthur's spot." "Arthur?" Michael asked. "Is that the man who usually sits here?" The woman nodded. "He's been in the hospital for the past week. He had a fall in his apartment." She looked sad. "He lives alone, you see, no family nearby." Michael felt his heart sink. "Which hospital?" he asked. That afternoon after school, Michael visited St. Mary's Hospital. He brought a small paper bag of breadcrumbs and a handmade get well card with pictures of pigeons drawn on it. He found Arthur in room 215, looking smaller and more fragile in his hospital bed, but his eyes lit up when Michael entered. "You're the boy who walks past my bench every morning," Arthur said, smiling. "You always seemed in such a hurry." Michael nodded. "I was worried when you weren't there this week. The pigeons miss you." They talked for an hour. Arthur told Michael about his life, how he had been a music teacher before retiring, how he started feeding the pigeons after his wife passed away 5 years ago. "They're good listeners," he said with a chuckle. Michael told Arthur about school, about his dream of becoming a veterinarian, and about how seeing Arthur on the bench every morning had become an important part of his day. Before leaving, Michael promised to keep feeding the pigeons until Arthur could return to his bench. "They shouldn't lose their breakfast routine just because you're here," he said. Every morning after that, Michael woke up 30 minutes earlier. He would stop at the bench, feed the pigeons, and sometimes leave a few crumbs for the squirrels too. He visited Arthur 3 times a week, bringing him updates about the park and his feathered friends. Other regular park visitors began to notice. Soon, Michael wasn't the only one stopping at the bench. People would leave breadcrumbs, share stories about Arthur, and keep his spot warm with friendship. 3 weeks later, Arthur was ready to come home. On his first morning back, he found not just Michael at his bench, but a small group of people. The morning jogger who always waved, the lady who walked her poodle, the young mother with twins in a stroller, all waiting to welcome him back. The pigeons seemed especially happy, cooing and strutting around their old friend. Michael helped Arthur sit down and handed him a paper bag full of breadcrumbs. "You know," Arthur said, looking around at all the friendly faces, "I always thought I was just feeding pigeons. I never realized I was building a community." From that day on, the bench was never empty. If Arthur couldn't make it, Michael would be there. Sometimes they sat together, sharing breadcrumbs and stories. Other times, park visitors would stop to chat, creating new friendships under the old maple tree. Michael learned that the smallest acts of kindness, like feeding pigeons or noticing when someone is missing, can create ripples of change in a community. A simple green bench had become a gathering place for people who might otherwise have remained strangers. Years later, when Michael graduated from veterinary school, he still visited the bench. Arthur was there less often now, but his spirit of kindness lived on. The bench had a small plaque on it that read, "Arthur's Bench, where friends gather and kindness grows." And every morning at 7:30, someone would be there, feeding the pigeons and smiling at passers-by, continuing the tradition that started with one kind man who understood that sometimes all people need is a place to belong.